Okay, now we're live. We're being watched officially, as if being on social media didn't ensure that anyway. Welcome, Augustonians. For those of you joining for the first time, my name is Jessica Lene, the literary curator of the August Wilson African American Cultural Center and host of Lit Friday. If you want to keep up with Lit Friday and myself, follow the center on Instagram at August Wilson Cultural Center, and follow me on Instagram at hang in there _kitty, spelled Kitty. For those new to the program, Lit Friday is a digital conversation program that happens on the final Friday of each month. On those Fridays, we feature writers, artists, and thinkers of the African diaspora to hear them share and talk about their work. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, author of Chain Gang All-Stars, a national bestseller and finalist for the National Book Award. Before we introduce Nana, let's organize our calendars. If you are in Pittsburgh on this Saturday and Sunday, the August Wilson African American Cultural Center is hosting the Black Bottom Film Festival. Tickets are still available, and we would love to watch some films with you over at the center. From November 3rd to November 4th, we have the Highmark Blues and Heritage Festival happening, and it's always an incredible time. On November 4th, we have Hip Hop Camp, My Name, My Place, a street art and graffiti workshop. November 9th, we have the opening of the largest solo survey exhibition of master painter Tim Okamura's exhibition, Ona Bugesha, Warriors of Light. And November 15th, we welcome Dr. Jessica B. Harris, New York Times bestselling author and a leading authority on food of the African diaspora, for our culinary series, A Seat at Our Table. I also want to see you back for November 17th for Lit Friday, because we will welcome multi-awarded poet Mahogany Brown for a reading from and conversation about her latest poetry collection, Chrome Valley. A note, we do not hold Lit Friday on the final Friday of November and December to avoid interfering with any plans for the upcoming breaks. So Lit Friday in November will be on the 17th, and Lit Friday in December will be on the 15th. And on November 18th, we welcome Mumu Fresh for our Soul Session series. For more details, registration, and ticket purchases, visit our events page at awaacc.org. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our honored guest. Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah is the New York Times bestselling author of Friday Black from Mariner Books in 2018. Of the collection, George Saunders notes, "These stories are an excitement and a wonder, strange, crazed, urgent, and funny, yet classical in the way they take on stubborn human problems, the depravities of capitalism, love struggling to assert itself within heartless systems. The wildly talented Adjei-Brenyah has made these edgy tales immensely charming via his resolute, heartfelt, immensely likable narrators, capable of seeing the world as blessed and cursed at once." Adjei-Brenyah's debut novel, Chain Gang All-Stars, which we'll be discussing tonight excitedly, is a national bestseller and a nominee for the National Book Award. About the book, Kiesi Lemon says, "In a narrative world where the real is growingly more unbelievable than the make-believe, Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah's Chain Gang All-Stars is an uncanny singular feat of literature. I've never read satire so bruising, so brolic, so tender, and really so pitch perfect. It's nuts brilliant. Just read it." And I was just telling Nana that I screamed that at strangers on the street when I'm holding the book. I'm like, "Have you read this?" Adjei-Brenyah was selected by Colson Whitehead as one of the National Book Foundation's 5 under 35 honorees, the winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle's John Leonard Award for Best First Book, and the Aspen Words Literary Prize. His work has appeared or is forthcoming from numerous publications, including the New York Times Book Review, Esquire, Literary Hub, the Parish Review, Guernica, and Long Reads. Before we dig into the conversation, we have the opportunity to hear Nana read. We appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. What a kind introduction. I appreciate it. I love hearing that blurb that Kiese blessed me with. I feel like it's the best blurb of all time just because it says brolic in it. A whole bunch of people
Frolic, right? The word.
a lot of people have no idea what that means, and that makes me like it a lot better. I'm gonna read a little bit from the beginning of the book. I say the beginning and not the prologue because one time I canvassed Twitter and I was like, when y'all see prologue in a book, you definitely read it, right? And the response was varied at best. And so again, I said this many times, I'm not trying to shame anyone, but if you are someone who skips the prologue, my question to you is, when you listen to music, do you just start the song like 37 seconds in, or is it just with music, just with books that you do this? And just for a little bit of setup, this book is about an imagined future in which convicted wards of state can opt out of a sentence of at least 25 years and participate in death matches. And it follows particularly a woman named Loretta Thurwar, who has been in the system, this program called the CAPE program, for almost 3 years. And if you survive 3 years, you get freed. So she's right on the precipice of winning her freedom. But this prologue takes place when she first started. It's called The Freeing of Melancholia Bishop. She felt their eyes, all those executioners. "Welcome, young lady," said Mickey Wright, the premier announcer for Chain Gang All-Stars, the crown jewel in the criminal action penal entertainment program. "Why don't you tell us your name?" His high boots were planted in the turf of the battleground, which is long and green, stroked with cocaine white hash marks like a divergent football field. It was Super Bowl weekend, a fact that Wright was contractually obligated to mention between every match that evening. "You know my name." She noticed her own steadiness and felt a dim love for herself. Strange. She counted herself wretched for so long, but the crowd seemed to appreciate her boldness. They cheered, though their support was edged with a brutal irony. They looked down on this Black woman, dressed in the gray jumpsuit of the incarcerated. She was tall and strong, and they looked down on her, the tight cords of black hair on her head. They looked down gleefully. She was about to die. They believed this the way they believed in the sun and the moon and the air they breathed. "Feisty," Wright said with a grin. "Maybe that's what we should call you, Little Miss Feisty." "My name is Loretta Thurwar," she said. She looked at the people all around her. There were so many of them, so many waves of humans who would never be the object of such cruel attention, would never know how it made you feel both tiny and all-powerful. How the thrum of thousands was so loud, so constant, it could disappear from your ears but continue to roar as something felt in the body. Thurwar gripped the weapon she'd been given, a thin, spiraling corkscrew with a cherry wood handle. It was light and simple and weak. "Not Little Miss Feisty, then?" Wright said, walking a wide orbit around her. "No." "That's probably for the best, Loretta." She stepped toward his box. "I hate wasting good names anyway." He laughed and the crowd echoed him. "Well, Loretta Thurwar." He threw his playful condescension directly at her, chopping her first name into 3 hard syllables, using a sing-song child's voice for her last. "Welcome to the battleground, baby." There's an electric cough in the air, and Thurwar was pulled down so forcefully she feared for a moment her arm had been dislocated at the shoulder. Kneeling, not knowing what else to do, she started to laugh, chuckling first, then deep laughter. The feeling of whole that came from the magnetic implants in her arms was actually one of gentle massage under the skin. She could wiggle her fingers freely, but her wrists were glued to the platform. The ridiculousness of it all. She laughed until she fell out of breath, then laughed some more. Then the bells began to sound. Wright screamed into the air, "Please rise for Her Majesty." He ran the rest of his way to his announcer's box. The crowd stood on their feet. They held themselves still and erect for her. She walked onto the full football field, aluminum alloy on her arms, braids that stopped at the back of her neck, exposed shoulders, each tattooed with the Whole Market trademark logo. A series of rods jutted out from her chest guard and circled her muscled abdomen to form a sleek cage. It was a custom creation. Thurwer had watched, even cheered, the first time she'd seen that the metallic pieces initially thought to be exclusively defensive were more. She'd been watching, huddled with the others in her cell block around the streaming video feed when the woman had removed 2 of the rods from her guard and pressed them into Slingshot Bob's eyes. And now, Thurwer was seeing them up close. This was Melancholia Bishop's final fight. Bishop had made it. Pardon me. She had done what no woman before her had done, survived 3 years on the circuit. 3 years of slamming down her hammer, Hasomaha, swiping her mace, Vega. 3 years conquering souls. Drowned King County's very own Queen of the Damned. All she had in her hands was her helmet, Melody's helm, Crusader style, made of tin with a gold cross down its middle. The Annihilator, the bad news bitch, the death songstress herself. The 7th bell rang, the people screamed for years. This had been their sacred ritual. The 7 bells of Melancholia Bishop. They'd seen her wipe scum off the earth. They'd seen her kill women and men who they'd once claimed to love. Now she stood and looked out at them for the last time. Soon she would be free. Melancholia, 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 the crowd chanted. Her brown eyes explored the bleachers. Then she raised the helm above her head. Once it was on, she was home. Melancholia, Melancholia, Melancholia. For the last time ever, Wright cheered. Please help me welcome the winningest woman to ever step on the battleground, the mistress of the murder ballad, the sacred sweetheart, the crusader, the baddest the planet has ever seen, your very own Melody, Melancholia Bishop Price. Your very own, there were thought, rattled by the force of love that exploded from the audience. They loved her so, and still, this woman, despite it all, belongs to none of them. She had an aura about her that made that clear. It was enough to push Thurwer's eyes down to the ground, as if the woman in front of her truly were royalty. Thurwer watched, bowed in her keep, an impossible power in front of her, the hammer, the mace. On one side of the field, there was a knight in her armor. On the other, there was Thurwer in a jumpsuit, a corkscrew slick in her clammy hands. I'll stop there. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant reading as well.
Thank you. I appreciate
not all
you.
brilliant writers are also brilliant at reading their own work. It can be hard.
Yeah, a lot of readers are really boring with it. They'll try to, add a little
something on there.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chain Gang All Stars has so much engineering, right? There are so many narratives happening at once that I have to start with the most obvious question, because it's probably the most sought after answer. It's what led you to this idea, and how did you prepare yourself to take on this kind of a project?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, just my first book, which is a short story collection, did prepare me in some ways. But the story really came to me. I thought this was going to be a short story. Obviously, I overshot it by several hundred pages, but once I had the character Thurwer, and the short story that I wrote was just Thurwer in the arena reflecting on her life, I was really interested by the potential life that I was missing out from her. And I also was interested by the question, what would make it acceptable for people to know this woman was suffering and being tortured even, and what would make a crowd of otherwise reasonable people feel like okay doing this? And the only answer that really came to me was if she had been accused of some serious crime. She was a convicted so-called criminal. And so that was my first dip into what would become a huge rabbit hole of incarceration and carceral thinking in America and beyond, and that made me interested in that whole like crazy web of institutions that we call the prison industrial complex. Then because Thoreau was really like the anchor of it all, or sometimes I say she's like the middle seat through which the rest of the book is tuned. Like I knew that I was going to do a novel, but if I was going to do a novel, like to me, if it can be a short story, I will make it a short story. Anything you see, if I ever write another novel, it'll be because I absolutely had to. Because I think like my soul form is really short story. And because I really value like the sense of like nothing is extra, everything is extremely necessary. And this book with such a choir of voices, the guiding principle had to be, I had to be able to connect it back to Thoreau in some type of way. And so in terms of like getting to be able to write this book, it was having like this particular woman who's in a particular situation and then coloring the world around her in a way that made sense during a really pivotal moment in her life.
And then I'm also wondering about how much just our current kind of culture, we haven't named yet. We know we have the culture of reality TV, but reading this was like Spartacus meets Ninja Warrior meets Oz in novel form, maybe even a little bit of The Wire kind of in there.
Yeah.
But so many of our stories that we consume have to do or related to carcerality. We have reality TV shows, 30 days in, 60 days in, 90 days in. Orange is the New Black, which is a drama, the documentary on Netflix, the world's toughest prisons. So we have all of this exposure to what's presented as the real stakes of what it is to be trapped or lost in the labyrinth of the prison industrial complex. So I wonder if how we consume this, do you think it's preparing us psychologically for this near future, some version of this, or are we already kind of soft there with the media that we consume?
I think it's such a good question. I think that we're soft there, but like almost, but not quite. Like we have those shows, but I mean, ever since Cops, you could argue we've been there on some level, but like we have this double think thing that America is really good at. Don't get me started. I'm looking at Joe Biden's tweets today, just like, what are you talking about? Like in the middle of, anyway, sorry. I think we're really good at like presenting ourselves on one side as like doing the moral thing, but stopping just short of being able to recognize the real harm we're doing to that individual. Because at a certain point, the balance changes greatly. Someone does something wrong, right? And it's bad and we condemn it. They go to the prison system and then something wrong is done to them for a very long time, but we don't really care. We don't see that part. Obviously some shows do, like Oz, and some shows have like given us an aspect to that piece, but so often like the ultimate like good rests in the hands of like the one with the power to incarcerate, the state or like the government or the whatever cop. And so we are there in some ways. I think that we fortunately don't have yet exactly a full, I mean, it's changing every day, to be honest. I think about this particularly now as countries are getting obliterated by America's guidance and blessing. I don't think we have a taste for like just stone cold murder right now. But I think that in some ways it's scarier because I don't think we recognize how many ways we are murdering people right now. So it's like, that's why I say it's the double think. We have a taste for it through ignorance. We don't realize that we actually are subscribing to this kind of thing already, because we like to think of ourselves as good, as holier than thou, as we have the self-righteous feeling about ourselves, we meaning America and Americans. And so it's weird, like we are there, but we're also not there, but mostly just because of our ignorance.
I think that there's also like this aspect of the way that the United States promotes itself internationally. There's this soft power where we're always trying to center ourselves as the adjudicators of what equity means, of what justice means. And inevitably, we always stop short when the bodies no longer approximate whiteness.
Yes.
In our empathy, in our understanding of the definitions of things. As you mentioned right now, there's so much brutality happening, and all of a sudden, superpowers that rely on white supremacist logic are changing the definitions of words that have really become internationally defined by Black radicalism, right? What is justice? What is equity? And I feel that that's here in the book. This change of this corporatization of prison is changing the definitions of the terms therein, changing the definitions of the game, the rule, or even what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And that's a huge part of it, because I think it's so interesting to watch like the genociders try to tell you what is and is not genocide, in real time. It's really trippy to watch it happen. And I think, again, it's almost like because like the propaganda machine is so strong, like they don't know what to do now that we can observe things ourselves. And they just stick to their own like party line without any regard for like an observable reality that we now can also observe. And it's really harsh. But yeah, like I think that's another word, like in terms of equity and justice. And also on the other side, like genocide, it's like they try to be like, no, not that. Not that's okay. And it's something else to watch. But I think of the prison system as another kind of genocide, absolutely. And so that's why I say that. I mean, obviously it has implications in many other contexts, especially right now. But I think that if we can grow to be the compassionate society I know we can be, there will be a time that looks back at this time, this era, as extremely grim and as a genocide unto itself.
Right. And another aspect of Chain Gang All Stars that I think is wonderful, especially in all of the narratives you decide to encompass in the novel itself, is that you're able to show the trajectory of how violence as entertainment affects people's intimate relationships. There's a relationship between a couple that in the book that revolves around consuming the reality TV around this brutal sport that's imagined in Chain Gang All Stars. Well, not even imagined, right? You have footnotes about enslaved Africans and enslaved Black people in antebellum the United States being forced to fight to the death for entertainment. And you're showing the historical trajectory between that and here. And I'm wondering what that kind of writing process looks like. Because sometimes the fear is this going to become didactic? Is this going to become too much? Is it going to become about this?
Yeah.
But those footnotes are working.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a really big challenge, because inherently footnotes feel like they could become didactic. Like they usually are inherently, like that's like usually their format. They're usually encyclopedic in their nature. They give you more information about something. And I actually don't like footnotes, myself. I'm not an academic. I don't have a PhD. I haven't or I'm not a true academic. I always say like in MFA, like there's real academia, and there's like us over here, and
Be dedicated to a footnote, because as I've become better at reading footnotes, as I grow into what they call an academic, it can go from just page number, publisher to real tea.
Yeah.
About
And
conflict between scholars.
Real tea. I love
Real
it.
tea.
And now, but yeah, and I've thought, and I guess rather what I should say is like, I thought I didn't like footnotes. And part of it, besides the encyclopedic nature of them, was that my big, sort of like writing, one of my big sort of almost like not even moral, but like almost like this is what I believe in as a writer. It was like, you never break the fictive dream. So a lot of my goal was to never ever break this like spell I have the reader in. And I used to feel that the footnote almost necessarily, I mean, it kind of does, because you just mechanically and physically have to remove your eye and look downwards. And I remember a writer, Alexander Chi, was like, well, dreams are not linear. Dreams aren't so one state anyways. And I think I found that I had a lot of pleasure in not making it obvious what was going to be when you looked out the footnote. Like sometimes they are for more information, sometimes they're elegiac, sometimes they're almost like a joke. One of them is a certain type of footnote that I don't want to spoil, but like operates in that other way. So like, excuse me, there's just like a lot of dynamism in the way they unfold. And that felt really important. But in terms of growing out like that trajectory of like not trying to be too didactic, it's really just about, the book is about Loretta Thurwar and the things that go around her. But because she is a prisoner, there's a big history that just coincides with her existence. And there's a lot of like ripples off of her experience that speak directly to experiences that people who are currently incarcerated are experiencing right now, people who have been incarcerated in the past are experiencing, and people who have been enslaved in the past are experiencing. And so I just kind of have to point, my job was just to point that out. And so example could be like, they have to eat, right? They're humans. And then I'm like, well, let me just check out the situation on food in prisons. And I just go to my little J store, do my little research, and boom, surprise, surprise, in incarcerated communities, the foodborne illnesses is like super rampant. Mm-hmm. And that alone just tells me like, that tells you a lot. I could have a huge footnote about that, but I'd rather just say that. So like, just so you know, that too is like fucked up in a way that if the goal is to be rehabilitative, like, should that be acceptable or what? And it's sort of me just saying like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I try my best not to be, in terms of the didacticness, like some of the issues are, some of it's so stark and obvious to me that I don't even gotta be like, you know what I mean? I could just, this is what's defined as torture. This is solitary confinement. This is the government's supposed stance on torture. And then I just gotta be like, you know what I mean? Then tell me what you think. You know what I'm saying?
But even there's this very like Swiftian, like Jonathan Swiftian, like eat the babies kind of pointing you to branding in the novel itself. You were really making it plain, the connection between the privatization of prisons, various institutions stock that they buy in those corporations, but the fact that prisoners can have rampant foodborne illnesses up to tapeworms, right? But still be required to produce food for Whole Foods or Whole Market, Life Depot, and I wanted to know how, like, because I mean, I would have been terrified. I would have been like, I'm gonna get sued.
I was scared, but also like, you know what I mean? I was scared, especially like more than that, when I was like, a lot of like when I name CEOs, if it's not the real name, it's someone's name very similar. Mm-hmm. That felt the most like precarious. But I mean, I just can't, I just get frustrated. Like, I don't know how Whole Foods just like, you know, market themselves this way as it's like for the people, blah, 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 and get to participate. I just don't think I'm just like, again, I just name them, you know what I mean? I just rather everyone kept it a buck. Like, I just look like, it's like, just say what you do and then let us decide, you know? And so to me, with the Whole Market versus like the like Home Depot or Life Depot, whatever, I don't feel like bad about that, because like it's just like a fact. And it's like, I'm not like making up something. The ones that I felt scared, if I felt most nervous about, was like when I'm like employing like people, but even that, like, they know who they are, you know, and in somewhat times they're proud of what they've done. With the LISO Act, the first George Bush is probably proud of that. And I'm like, this is just in case you don't know, sometimes it's just about demystifying reality from what is presented to us and curating in that kind of way. Because again, I'm not saying like, fuck George H.W. Bush. I'm saying like, please have tanks now, and this is why.
Mm-hmm. Or even just how the way you've constructed this world makes the emotional manipulation, corporate manipulation of people's emotional attachment to what defines their identities, almost this caustic energy that they can turn up or turn down the volume on, depending on what they're trying to market or get you to invest in, and especially in terms of safety. This question comes up over and over again from multiple characters throughout the book. And it's like, well, aren't the prisons actually keeping us safer? Or is it just a temporary cathartic theater for those who have unfortunately experienced violence and consider prison to be justice, because that's the only form of justice they've ever seen? But multiple people ask this question, but then you're able to present very honest and yet empathizing portraits of people put into this game that are, you know, been incarcerated for SA, trigger warning everybody, or been incarcerated for harming somebody else until they're no longer present with us. And you're able to give their life a span without necessarily excusing their acts of what they did. And that's such a hard psychological place to maneuver in as an artist yourself. What was that like, writing out these characters for you, and how did it help you access this world better?
It's a really smart question. And in general, I really appreciate your reading of this book. I think I can see like where you're coming from with all the questions, and I really do appreciate it, because it's like kind of like the ideal things I would hope that people would think of. Yeah, that question of like harm is kind of the question in any kind of abolitionist like context. And to be like super like fair and also transparent, it's not like I said this a couple of times, like for me, when I started writing this book, I probably started a little bit over 8 years ago now, 8 years ago. It's not like I was like, I think I was abolitionist on paper, you know, but also what did that really mean to me? You know, I think it was a very shallow feeling about it because of those things, because we have this thing in America, and not America, the whole world, where like the what we know as justice usually involves violence. We think that violence must be met with violence. It's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And again, we see that again right now happening, unfolding. And so it's like in the water, we're all kind of poisoned with this like very reductive, simple kind of thinking. Excuse me. And the flip side of that, what is also this is another way of saying violence, but we're also trained that in response to those who do harm, we should withhold compassion. Mm-hmm. That is like an essential part, and actually isolate them from compassion necessarily, which is what prisons are. And so that feels right to us because all we know, it's all we've been taught. And so in terms of like how I came to write, thinking about this is by like wondering if that made sense. Again, having like sort of that little seed of knowing, for my father, for example, was involved in trying to help people who had done serious crimes be treated fairly, having that just seed in the back of my mind and wondering like, how is this cycle like perpetuated? Why are we always hurting each other? Why are we always harming each other? And so, yeah, and the full transparency, like I probably was like just a very shallowly understanding of it. And it was very limited too. I know a lot of people who say like, well, I'm an abolitionist except for people who do X. And if they do that, they deserve to be under the jail. It's kind of like this moral stance. They feel proud of it. And I get, and my sort of response, again, through learning like more about these, like this conversation, and then again, leaning a lot on people much smarter than me, like Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Angela Davis, and maybe like Albert Woodfox, is that like, we're not saying to like, oh, if you're a victim, whatever. No, we're saying here's a way to actually decrease these issues in our community spaces, in our local communities, in our greater communities, in our cities, in our countries, in our global civilization. Is to like infuse compassion into the way we actually build spaces and our appreciation of each other. And so like, it means acknowledging that prisons inherently kind of destroy our ability to respond meaningfully to mental health crises. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They destroy our ability to respond meaningfully to the disease of addiction. They individualize and criminalize systemic issues like poverty. And those three things alone account for 90-something% of people in prison. And so what if we actually address these issues? How do we do that? It's going to be a myriad of ways. It's by totally re-understanding this world. But if we did that, who knows what we could do? I've been thinking a lot about how like our society, particularly America, but I think generally is like bookended by these like death institutions. Externally, we have militarism. Internally, we have the carceral state. And on both sides, if we divested from these like death institutions and invested in community, in making sure people had food, just food. If people had food, how much would so-called crime disappear? And again, it's not to say that like maybe like that there's never, ever a time where like someone might have to be slightly removed from a space because they're in the middle of doing harm. It's about our approach to them. It's about thinking, and never, ever. Again, it's a challenge because I'm not going to say like, I see it like, oh, I just can do it. If someone aggresses me, I wouldn't want to aggress them, period. But as a community, we can hold ourselves to a higher standard. That's the whole point of having institutions outside of ourselves. But right now, for the most part, we have a system that, oh, you did violence, well, violence happens to you if you are someone of color without resources, because we know it can be much more compassionate for people who have resources. So And again, not to mention, it's also just ineffective. The efficacy is low because all the things we are afraid about that the system supposedly saving us are still happening all the time. So by doing the research and arming myself with like truth, in reality, it got a lot easier to like, and it's still a challenge because the programming in every side is good guy has a gun, throws the bad guy in jail, we win, go home. And so it's been a long process, but the book was sort of me discovering and relearning and organically, actually, like not from a place of, oh, I already know. Because there's a time where sometimes, you hear about something dark and I feel like, well, but then if it depends on what you believe about people. And for me, I believe that people are good and everyone can be good. And it's just that if they're not, we lost them somewhere along the way. And I think we deserve to at least try. What if we at least tried the thing where everyone had some food, where everyone's mental health problems were at least had a chance to be meaningfully addressed? If people's addiction problems at least had a chance to be handled in a place where compassion was centered. What if we at least tried that for some time? And then, all right, if that doesn't work, then we'll go back to the drawing board. But we know for sure this carceral throw them in a hole thing doesn't work. So why are we so addicted to it? And spoiler alert, because people can make a lot of money off of it.
Exactly. People can make a lot of money off of it. You have an activist character. I'm trying to say things about what's happening without giving away the plot.
I
and
see you doing it. Yeah.
A wonderful surprise. There's a character in the book that makes a point. And one of the points is we can't keep blaming individuals. We have to see what our social structure, our legal structure, and what our philosophy of citizenship actually does to our institutions that are actually searching for a reason to criminalize you based on a vulnerability that you have that's completely human. Which means that our philosophy around being a citizen is inherently one where there's a lack of compassion, a lack of humanity, a lack of understanding, and whether or not you feel citizen depends on how vulnerable you are and how much violence the state can do to you. But I remember being in high school and taking civics where I first learned this with a Black teacher. But if you ask kids nowadays about a civics class, they're like, what do you mean the three branches? Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about checks and balances? And in our education system, it's like we're losing our historic memory, our ability to remember, which I think is the audience here. This audience is the audience that comes from the situation our education system is in now. Right? Entertainment becomes history, but the structure you've chosen challenges that. Can you talk a little bit about entertainment becoming history?
That's such a bar. That's such a bar. That's so real. Like entertainment, I'm like, I usually have my notebook with me. I'm gonna write that down because it really has. It's like scary. This is gonna be a tangent. I'm gonna get back to it though. Like I really think like we need to bring back the term like sellout. Because I'm like, anyone could advertise for anything. I'm like, we are letting this slide a little too much now. Like now it's getting crazy. And also it's weird because like now, in terms of the entertainment thing, it's like the final goal of almost any endeavor is like virality, which is like serialized entertainment, and endorsement, which is commercialized entertainment, I guess. It's like, that's like just the goal now of existence. I can't wait to write a story about that, where like, instead of graduating, you get like endorsed, because it just feels like what is everything. And so, yeah, I think in terms of like entertainment becoming history, like like Donald Trump being the president, like it just shows like that's like a very stark, obvious example of it. It's like the most powerful thing is just people's attention, and people just like vote for what's they attend to, because again, they're being trained because that's what can hold my attention for long. This is like just what feels like is the best. We have this like fame economy, this clout economy, this like entertainment, this numbers thing. And people truly get to feel like they're the best because of this, like just we've grown so accustomed to this, like, to me, the entertainment as history feels very connected to like the winner as history, the most like just whoever has the most money. I think so much about how these like, I obviously like, I guess not obviously, but I like rap or whatever, or music generally. And I think about now they talk about like their album sales. And it's like, because people No matter what the critique is, if you stream well, it's like, well, I'm selling well, which first off is an illusion, because there's such a big difference between going to buy a CD or a record or a tape and streaming it on a whatever. So number one, but this like feeling that you are the best because you have the most, and it's just not reality. And so I think with this,
it's very Victorian. It's like, oh, if you're rich and successful, then that means you must be a good person. And if you're poor, then that's evidence that you're bad. It's like a very
explicit.
Victorian kind of.
It's really explicit. And that's why that's why I want us to bring back sellout, because you can't sell out now, because overtly worshiping money is a part of the craft anyways in some fields. How do you sell out if your whole thing was that you was rich?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, it don't matter what you say or what you endorse, because you're getting to a bag or whatever. And I mean, and I even say for myself, as someone who's involved in like some level of commerce, like, because I sell it, because there's a book that has my name on that gets sold.
Okay.
Like, I want people to, like, if I do something really out of pocket, I hope people say, like, you sold out, like, just to keep, not like, it's not like, because again, not in like a carceral way. I'm not saying to like obliterate me or anyone. I'm saying to have some type of standard outside of quote unquote success, quote unquote money, that is tied to some type of moral ethic.
That is the communalism, right? Because in Changing All Stars, people develop intimate relationships and communities around watching abject violence as a form of entertainment, which kind of recapitulates this harshness that we have when we cancel somebody, right? And people being like, well, when you cancel someone, what you do is preclude the opportunity to have a real conversation about what happened and why. Whereas sellout seems like it was on the road to cancel culture, but the way we consume data and produce it has just taken the human element out of what it means to go buy a book, or what it means to go buy a Pete Rock vinyl and to contribute to some kind of physical ephemera. It all becomes a dissociated kind of practice.
Yes, exactly. And it makes it, in that dissociation, like, the companies have just like swooped in and like pull all the strings now. Because the sellout is like a conversation. We're saying we respect, to be a sellout, we have to have some type of respect for you. Mm-hmm. At some point, now it's like, no, that's out the box. Just how much can you feed my like dopamine right now? Do whatever song and dance you got to do, and whatever. And so in some ways, like, the occasion of the book is like, or even in a space of general, like, they're obviously in deep oppression, but because of the situation she's found herself in, she's like at the top of the heap in this oppressive state. And even in that place, she's sort of, because by being spurred on by other characters, particularly Stack, she's choosing to like, to have some type of more ethic, like moral sort of like approach to like employing her status. And even when she doesn't have to, because she's almost done and she's rich in that world. And that feels very important to me, because it just doesn't seem like a thing that is done anymore. And it's like, I feel very stressed out by it. I'm very happy that you're talking about this, because this is like, it bothers me. Like, I think about it all the time. Like, I remember when even 6 years ago, you didn't ever talk about betting during like a sport. I like basketball, whatever too. And now it's like all these like DraftKings and all this type of shit. I mean, stuff. It's everywhere. It's like they run all the shows now. Look how quick that happened. We didn't get to have a conversation about it. They was like, oh, I see DraftKings now on the screen, and all of a sudden, boom! Now they own it within, because they saw how much money there was, and all of a sudden they got them on the. How crazy is that for a sporting event itself to even? That's all the room for corruption, all the room that we, and at the very least, I wish we could have had a conversation like culturally about it, but if they didn't do that, because why would you? There's money to be made.
Exactly. And then I also wanted to think about with you the how do I say it? The hyper eroticism around Black women's body in peril.
Yeah.
That the book kind of operates around. In these kinds of literatures, it's very rare to have a Black feminist perspective that's applied to leading Black women, or even just femme, like Black femme protagonists, right? And so I wanted to know why Loretta, Thurwar, and Stax became your guides, your kind of like your Virgil through this story you're telling.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And like, so the very, very first thing with Thurwar, it kind of just happened. But the question sort of becomes, why did I keep her as the protagonist from like the short story to the thing? And it's because of some of the things we're talking about. One, I knew that she would, because of like the Hydra nature of the prison industrial complex, I knew that through her person, she would have a lot of access to like sort of its different ways of like destruction, all the different ways it like sort of is, like the fact that most people, like there's just so many ways like her personal identity could be preyed upon, whether it's the fact that most women in prison are victims of SA, whether it's the fact that the prison industrial complex particularly targets LGBTQIA community. There's so many other things in that, whether it's just by being a person of color, like she's at the nexus of many different types of particular like targets that the prison industrial complex creates. But I think even more than that, in terms of like the public eye, there's like a way that a Black woman is like consumed in a certain kind of way, like consumes like in like a literal sense, almost like it's okay if we eat her till she's dead, gone. And also we're watching her success with this kind of, not us, but like America is watching her success with this like desire to see her collapse or fail. And you could insect whatever person you want to talk about. And there's going to be some kind of disrespect on top of her dominance, whether it's Simone Biles, Serena Williams, whoever you want to talk about. There's like Beyonce, there's like a
Nicki Minaj being continuously shaded for a Grammy, the kind of online bullying Rihanna's received as she's had children instead of producing some ephemera for people to conceive. Even though we're talking about extremely privileged people, the abuse that they kind of get publicly is specific to Black women. It's
specific. It's not like what Taylor Swift gets. It's a different thing. And that felt important because of like, again, like the type of person Thurwar, like the position Thurwar is occupying, which is also a celebrity, a star, So that felt really key. And then in terms of, I needed someone who really understood that as well with Stax. And like understood like in their person. Because to be honest, like when I first when I was first early on, I didn't know that she would be with Stax, but then Stax appeared and I kind of needed, I knew that Thurwar wouldn't listen to someone else. Because it would be like, you don't really get it. Even if you're as popular as me, like you don't really, really get it. Excuse me, pardon me. That's something I'm interested to think about in like whatever adaptation stuff we try to do if we do that. Because like someone like Sunset, like there'll be a limit to like what he kind of really understands, even as he's in a similar position. But also, again, not to like sort of like, I don't know, do like magical, like, and this power of woman thing on Thurwar, but in terms of like being in that position of power and still like making something different, or like, I just don't see men do that. I don't see a man making that stand. And again, that's the obvious example I would say is like the NBA has a lot more like cultural power to say than the WNBA. But the WNBA, if anything happens, will make a stand way before the NBA does. You know what I'm saying? And so in that sense, it just felt, because I knew in terms of like in the book, Thurwar and Stax kind of make it so that there's like a non-violence kind of like commitment in their chain. I just can't like. And again, one time I kind of tried it and it just didn't read true for a man to do that. If a man is in the position of power, he's going to kind of just let it rock. I just realistically didn't see it. So that's part of why.
I mean, now that we're talking about gender and sexuality, there's even a portion of Chain Gang All Stars where you're asking some really hard questions about masculinity, the way we socialize people into masculinity depending on certain factors, and how it almost predisposes certain people to be okay with a certain kind of violence against others as the entry level to participating in the masculine. We have, one character saying, like, I know who I am. I'm not going to do the nonviolence thing. Who's a man. Another one that really wants to fight because he feels like no one's respecting his masculinity representation. And so we see all of these ways that representations of masculinity end up having the values that the system that people are in as well.
Yes, the potential for violence is like cultivating some type of personal potential for violence is a part of being raised as a man. It just is. Like you should have the capacity for it as a man. That's what you're told. I'm not saying that's correct, but it's absolutely 100% part of the deal. And that can be like, so I think most times people say like in a defensive mode, which can be great, but without, again, a clear, like compassionate community to guide you, it runs rampant really, 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 really fast. It turns harsh really, really fast. The violence is enacted against yourself and people around you very quickly. If it's not, because violence is very hard to contain. And so absolutely that sort of masculinity as being sort of almost defined by potential for violence is something I think about. And even the stuff I think about that in this book, but I think about it in general. I think as a writer that happens to be a male or identifies male, like it's something you can witness, because as you start growing, you're like, huh, like look at all these times I'm expected to like enter this or that space.
So I want to turn a little bit back to craft again.
Yep.
The structure of the book is a mixture of short glimpses, deeply intimate yet fleeting glimpses into the lives of the different characters you introduce us to. Sometimes the chapters are portraits of the imprisoned being situationally forced. Some chapters show the larger effect of the entertainment on the people that consume it. The footnotes situate a historical flow, and you're able to kind of effortlessly shuffle the reader between these perspectives. I started trusting the world very, very early. And so I want to know how this polyphonic structure, multivocal structure, the structure of many voices, served your goals for this project.
Yep. I think first off, again, great articulation of that question. I really do appreciate them all. On one side, it like just mattered to me to speak to, like, if Third War is like that central beam or like that stone in the water, all these ripples affect her. And so maybe it's like way over there, it's some guy in solitary confinement, but at one time Third War was in that situation, and so I wanted to have that there. And also, like with the influencer, like I know that that's something that she's been exposed to, so I want to have that there. I think also just in terms of the goals, like part of why I think short stories is my like thing is like it's hard for me to be just one place at any time in general, which is something I'm working on, meditation or whatever. But like, if I had to have just one point of view and perspective, it would feel very like limiting. Also, I think that's a product of what I used to think was like a big weakness of mine. I remember in MFA being like, I don't know if I should write these type of stories or quote unquote realism or quote unquote surreal or speculative, or all these genre names that I had which didn't mean much to me, but in some of those artistic spaces, people think about them a lot in quote unquote literary world. I say quotes for all of them because to me it's all fake, whatever. It can be useful.
Covering MFA or in poetry. I'm with you.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like all those things, like sure, if it's useful to you, but pretty quickly it can be used against you or to make you feel like you're less than or whatever. So I think that what used to be what I feel proud of now used to be what was like my big shame, which is that I happen to be a writer who feels just as comfortable writing in the so-called speculative as the so-called realism. I used to feel like I was like messed up. Now I feel like the Avatar, like I don't. And so in a book like this, there could be a lot of different voices, different points of view. Some of them even have different registers of like reliability or reality. Some of them push into like what might be semi-surreal. I feel very comfortable, and like I feel most comfortable when I'm like juggling a knife and a bowling ball and like a watermelon and all these different things, just to see if I can do it. And so that also feels important to me in terms of like just feeling really engaged with the project. So that was one piece of it, but really all stems from like creating this choir of things that feel really disparate and then come together nicely. Because again, I'm like a more like, I don't know, like meta level that also feels important because of, again, the hydra nature of the prison industrial complex has many, many different faces. And many people are implicated in many different ways. And it felt important to the project of the book to also represent that like through its actual existence, if that makes sense.
It does. So I have two more questions. We're going to go over just a tad, but
These are really good questions. are you always the one who like, are you always the interviewer?
Yes.
I'm definitely, are you definitely gonna, and I heard the names you was talking about. Mahogany's next. She's super dope. So I'm going to watch that. I'm going to definitely
We
be
had
tapped in.
Roger Reeves last month.
That's my guy too.
And I, like Antonio Howard is a guest of ours who wrote his autobiography about being incarcerated for about, I think if I'm remembering correctly, 16 years for just being an accessory to like a tragedy that happened. And he writes about his experience as a juvenile in the prison industrial complex. And is a great writer and a great journalist in his own right. But my question is one that
I love your questions. I'm going to watch your stuff. I need to get your schedule, like the schedule after this, if you email me or something. I don't know.
Sure, absolutely. But you were on the Daily Show, which is a big deal. You had an interview in Esquire, which people would say, that's a big deal. And congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
And now that the book is a national bestseller, I imagine that there are larger diasporan communities in various ways that are picking up this book. And so now it's gaining legs internationally. What has been difficult as you've been in the world discussing the subject matter of this book, right? What has been difficult about having this discussion with a broader audience? What's been difficult about that, but what's also been helpful or joyful about having these new experiences, talking about such hard subject matter with audiences that in a lot of ways are very ignorant to the structures that they live in?
It's again a smart question because everybody's not you, right? Like you clearly like know what you're talking about and are steeped in this thing. And I can tell from just talking to you that you've thought about a lot of these ideas way before you ever read this book, right? And so like a challenge, which I haven't ever even named, but I'm glad that you even are bringing it up, is that I have to sort of like oscillate or like almost like it's not exactly code switching, but it's like I have to identify really quickly where A, the interviewer is at, and B, the venue. I already know what the Daily Show is, but I know who Jesus is. And like I rock with him, he's cool. But also I know like if it was Trevor Noah, it would be different as well. You know what I mean? And so whoever you're talking to, you have to like try to meet them where you're at. Because again, I don't mean to condescend to anyone because I also understand where I was before. I'm from Spring Valley, Rockland County. Like before, like where I'm from, like people like there's a lot of ideas that when I went to grad school, I was exposed to that I had where I'm from. I'd never heard of it. So, and I know there's people who are in some of these spaces that whether you want to call academic or whatever, who are very like condescending to those people because everyone they know are those people. But like, there's a whole bunch of world who has no idea about this. And I don't look down on them.
Spirit, let me rephrase. It's not that people are ignorant to the system that they are in, but they have a different perspective for the knowledge that they do have about living in systems. And that's more valuable to say than calling people ignorant, right?
Yeah. And like there's like a true ignorance that is not bad. There's a you know what I mean? Like you just haven't thought of it. I haven't been, let me see if this is true. Part of my whole, in some ways, like what I think I represent in the literary world is like a Trojan horse to exactly, in some ways, a Trojan horse to a lot of these ideas for people. Because also my person, I'm very kiki, but I'm like, on the inside, I'm like very like, we should burn this whole thing down a lot, like for sure. But but in my like person, I can be at the thing, and I don't know, some people might find that like my book is an entertaining book, but hopefully like it like hurts you, and even as and that's because I write what comes from my person and my essence, and everyone's role is different. Some people, their affect is more serious and they have to be straight up like, boom, I'm telling you straight up and down the facts. Me, I'm like, look at this, like, well, I'm like, watch here, but with the back of my hand, I'm like throwing like this information and perspective and like, you know, through the sideway. And so the interview is like, when I'm out in the world, I'm always thinking, I've actually like naturally internalized just doing it quickly. And so the challenge kind of just is like trying to meet someone where they're at in a way I can say the most effective thing. The other challenge is just like, this is, I guess, less of a thing, but, you know, just feel like I'm not hoping that I'm not misrepresenting something, because I'm always still growing. I'm also still learning. I'm also like, you know, I have my own ignorances, you know, and so that can be a challenge. Also, sometimes it's a challenge where people want you to be, because they like you, they want you to be a little less, quote unquote, radical than you are, and you be and like, oh, but you don't really think this. I'm like, no, I really think that. And that's like, you know, you don't want like prison to not exist. You're just saying, I'm like, no, I do not think, I would think that I want us to go to a place where it doesn't exist. And, you know, but it's almost whatever, because I expect that. And the cool thing is meeting like-minded people. Like, again, I feel grateful just to like, I feel when the thing I like about your question is it makes me like consider myself and the world, like I feel a little smarter from hearing the question. I like that feeling. So that happens sometimes, not often, it's rare actually, but that happens sometimes, and that's nice. I also get to feel like I'm in community with people who like care. I recently got to go to Shawagunk prison and talk to some guys inside, and, you know, just be like, I don't know, the book has made my experience of the world I'm thinking about less theoretical, and I get to be in community more, and it makes me smarter, and I feel like a more complete person, and that's probably my favorite part.
And my last question is always for, you know, the young writers, right? Who are watching, who will access this video, who, you know, are just feeling the struggles like, oh, how do I get into that journal? Oh, how do I get an agent? Oh, am I
Yeah.
writing the right thing? Oh, well,
Yeah.
no one's paying attention. What do I do? And the way that we are consuming and producing data is making it, I think, more of like a fluke when sometimes it does happen. These things happen for people. But what is one thing you learned in your writing career that you think other young or beginning writers should know, that you were happy to have learned but wished you knew sooner?
This is gonna make me get up on my soapbox. I'm gonna try not to go too far into it. I'm just gonna say, like, all right, there is your work and the thing you're trying to make, which is like a translation into the physical world, like a reflection of like your spirit, soul, heart, whatever you want to talk about it. That thing, that like undeniable piece of you that you're trying to bring onto the world. That thing has the whole universe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Selling a book or being published is you briefly like taking a piece of that largest and putting it into like a tiny little box for people to have. And that's great. But in summoning yourself onto the page or whatever, that is alchemy and magic that contains so much, and it's the only time that anything in this space to me approaches like what you might want to call like the holy, like that real thing.
Ecstasis.
Yeah, that place. And I'm thinking about this now because it's like award season, and it's really easy to get caught up in that side of it. And should I win, I will say something like this on the stage and any of these things that are coming up. And I've been saying a way of saying is like the glory that's to be had in the writing world, in the doing, in growing your craft, and focusing on what you care to say and sharing something useful to the world. That is the special place. These other things are dope. I'm not saying don't go for them. I'm a competitive person. I like to like win shit or whatever, but the desire for those things is small, and what you are is massive, is endless. And don't like over shrink yourself. Don't over privilege what's on that side of the wall, because I've been to that side of the wall. The food is mid. A lot of the people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And a lot of it's just it's a dog and pony show. Is that the term? It's like it's just costuming. A lot of it is costuming. A lot of it is costuming in art spaces in general. And so never lose your ability to distinguish from that real thing versus the costume associated with the real thing. And you can do that by really focusing on your craft, continuing to find wonder in what you create, and not being afraid to try things that are challenging and difficult, and taking pleasure in that, making something from nothing. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Nana. Everybody, Chain Gang All Stars. It's worth it. Is there an audiobook yet?
Yeah, there is, and they killed it. They smoked it. It's 4 actors. They went crazy.
Audiobook on a long drive, audiobook on a plane ride. Pick the book up. Do whatever you do to get your literature. We appreciate you being with us so much. And everybody, come right back on November 17th so we can hear Mahogany Brown talk about her latest, Chrome Valley. And I appreciate
She's super dope.
I'm coming. She's amazing.
I'm gonna come.
Come through. We want to see you. We'll give you the panelist link, and then we can all have a big conversation about the dopeness that Mahogany writes.
This is really, if I'm like in town, I'm gonna be there. This was great. I really do appreciate the care and consideration you had in reading this book. Yeah, I can feel it very deeply. So thank you so much.
No, I am grateful for seeing all of this information packaged into a physical space where people can spend time with it and absorb this in a way that makes it internalizable.
Yeah.
It's sneakily. You're sneaky.
Yeah, you know what I mean? You gotta, it's a lot of peanut butter, before you get the thing. Like, here you go. Here's some, and it's all that stuff. But I appreciate it a lot. So it's an honor.
Thank you so much. Everyone, have a good evening. Join us for the Black Bottom Film Festival. If you're in Pittsburgh, come see us tomorrow. And I'll follow up with you soon. Thank you so much, Nana.
Peace.
Good night, everybody.